Hi everyone, welcome to the first Cybersecurity Magazine podcast of the year, where we are looking at post-quantum cryptography and the upcoming ETSI Quantum Safe Cryptography event. I have with me Rajiv Prasad, also from CSM, and we are joined by Matthew Campagna, Senior Principal Engineer at Amazon Web Services. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Delighted to be here and talk about the work going on at ETSI.
Great. Next month, ETSI is hosting the 9th ETSI IQC Quantum Safe Cryptography event. Would you like to start by just introducing the event a little bit, what kind of topics are being included, and your involvement here?
Sure. So the workshop is the ETSI and IQC's annual conference, really to align industry, government, and academia on the development of post-quantum cryptography. So when we started this workshop 10 years ago, was really around the perspective of how do we gain momentum behind the development of post-quantum standards. And that's changed over the years. I mean, we started it from the perspective of we had gone through the transition of elliptic curve cryptography to classical, from RSA cryptography to elliptic curve cryptography. And we know it takes 15 to 20 years for that evolution to take place. So today, the workshop still comes together, still brings together the same set of experts from academia, government, and industry to sort of stay aligned on the development of those standards and how we're going to deploy that and migrate to post-quantum cryptography. So it's broken into two sections. We have an executive track day that's really trying to provide information to decision makers within companies and governments on how to direct their resources and when they should start planning for migration. And then 2 days of technical talks that really get into the nitty-gritty of post-quantum cryptography and what individual projects are doing at this point in time.
Great, thank you. And I guess to kind of start at the beginning, obviously, like we were saying, it's been a long time now that we've been talking a lot about quantum technologies and the possibilities that they could bring, but now also kind of potential threats as well. So just wondering if you could quickly outline kind of what threats quantum technologies will pose to security and who is at risk and who kind of needs to be aware.
Yeah, so I think the thing that gets the most attention is when it comes to the threat of quantum computing on cryptography, is the development of a large-scale quantum computer, sometimes called a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, that you can run an algorithm called Shor's algorithm, which effectively breaks the public key crypto systems that I spoke about earlier, RSA and elliptic curve, meaning that essentially we use these public key algorithms to secure, communications over untrusted networks like the internet or cellular. And so all those systems that are using those public key algorithms are sort of vulnerable to this the development of a large-scale quantum computer. We have time. It's going to take a long time to get to that scale of a quantum computer. So we know it takes 15 to 20 years to get that work done. So we have time to move steadily towards migration to post-quantum crypto.
So, Matthew, this is definitely, again, I'm sort of repeating some of what Philip has said. It's obviously very fascinating subject to discuss, especially on the back of the Nobel laureates from 2022 on, the three physicists who were conferred that. So what is also interesting, I found while I was preparing, I guess, for this podcast, is as I was reading up on quantum computing and the research behind it and the cryptography, the first article I found was 12 years old, and it referred back to research 15 years earlier. So obviously it's been coming along for some time, and there are a lot of entities, governmental and private, who are investing heavily into this. So how do you see the security could be managed in a more synchronized manner, since they're different parties sort of developing various aspects of this technology. And of course, in one of your paper, you talk about key hybrid encapsulation. So could you tell us a little more on this in a way that we can understand better for the
Sure.
non-technical?
So, I mean, to dive into the quantum safe hybrid key establishment, and there is an ETSI technical specification for doing that, and it's a way that we can start testing the impact of these new post-quantum algorithms that are being proposed for standardization now, without losing the classical cryptographic security that we have with the elliptic curve and RSA schemes. And the way it works is essentially you're doing two key agreement operations in parallel. So with the same initial message, let's say from Alice to Bob, she's basically sending two public keys. One, a classical public key, and one of these new post-quantum. Mm-hmm. And Bob, the responder, will respond with both the public key for let's say the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key establishment, as well as a ciphertext from the post-quantum key encapsulation mechanism. And then they essentially establish two shared keys this way, and then they combine them to encrypt the communication channel. And that allows us to sort of begin to modify our existing protocols today in advance of the algorithms being standardized, and begin testing, what needs to change about our algorithms, about our protocols, because these new post-quantum algorithms are different. They have different bandwidth and computational usage that are going to change sort of the latency or the reliability of connections. So by doing some of this work in parallel, we can move, we can parallelize the work, so that when we have the new post-quantum algorithms standardized, we already know whether or not they're going to fit and work in our protocols. And to the most part, we'll have those protocols already defined, and we can begin building them.
Now that you've actually brought up, Rajiv, the post-quantum algorithms, on that note, perhaps Matt, you could talk a bit about kind of NIST and their selection of the standards, and what timeline we're kind of looking at with these algorithms for actual deployment.
Yeah, first, NIST taking on the post-quantum cryptographic standardization process is probably the best outcome that could have been predicted at our first ETSI IQC workshop. We know it takes a large organization like NIST to sort of, I'll say, corral the global community of cryptographers to analyze a set of algorithms and whittle that set of algorithms down and keep that community focused on a handful of algorithms, so that we can reach a high assurance cryptographic algorithm. And that's going to take time. And NIST has been, I think they started in 2016, the announcement. They've gone through their 4 phases. They've selected at least 2 algorithms now, the Crystal's dilithium for digital signatures, and Crystal's Kyber for key encapsulation mechanism, and 2 other standards for signatures. But those are the 2 primary ones that the community is now focused on, finishing that analysis and getting to final standardization, probably the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. I think the adoption and migration to these new algorithms, you can look at the trend from RSA to elliptic curve and see probably a very similar arc on adoption. The first is going to be sort of in the key agreement schemes, because they tend to be a little more ephemeral. As I said before, the adoption of these hybrid post-quantum key agreement mechanisms to provide us long-term confidentiality to our communications. After that, you'll see the development of these new long-lived roots of trust. that are sort of like in our browsers and in our operating system, they take a little while longer to develop because you want to host them in hardware security modules that tend to have a certification program associated with them. And that means once the standard's done, you have to define the testing requirements and essentially train your developers to develop products that meet those testing requirements and go through a certification period. And once you come out of that, you're now in a position to sort of define your key ceremonies for establishing your new long-lived roots of trust. So I think you'll see that second phase of development of those long-lived roots of trust, those distributions, they'll show up in your operating systems, in your browsers. Small closed systems will begin using them for digital signatures. But then there'll be this third phase where it becomes crystal clear that we need to migrate even our online authentication transactions. And we'll see that sort of as the third phase of now all our web certificates or certificates for websites will be PQ enabled. So I don't know if I have an exact timeline. I would say, you know, there's 2 years before you're really going to pop out the standards. Some of this work is being done in parallel so that the 4 or 5 years following those standards, I think you'll see this the integration into most of our protocols for long-term confidentiality, shortly followed by, you know, within 3 to 5 years after those standards, these long-lived roots of trust being deployed, and sometime after that, you know, heavily used for authentication.
So the implementation of this process as such, is it determined by industry following, then moves into more mass use by individuals? Is that one way of visualizing the implementation?
Well, I think, I guess as standards development organizations define, you know, how to integrate them into their protocols, they know it's going to take a little while, you know, to go from, you know, just the definition of those standards to the testing of those standards to deployment. And I think that's where you'll see the adoption. So they'll be coming out of products that are built to standards primarily. And along those lines are like products that are built to government requirements or I'll say industry have requirements that they adhere to. I think that's where you'll see building new products that conform to standards like the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, and then also these industry programs.
I find it interesting you're talking about the timelines, and obviously you can guess, but you're not entirely sure. And that obviously ETSI has been looking at this for a number of years now. Like you said, that you've been having these events before NIST even started choosing their algorithms. It's something we talk about a lot in Cybersecurity Magazine, kind of when to start looking at security for certain technologies. How important is it in security and security standards to be looking ahead to things or threats that might not even really exist yet? You said we're still very limited in our quantum computing power. Like the threats you're kind of thinking of don't exactly exist right now. But how important is this kind of prediction and kind of planning that far in advance? Because I think historically a lot of security developments have happened in reaction to attacks or technology developments, but this is something slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah, when you look at this threat of quantum computing and you're trying to predict how am I going to provide security for or long-term confidentiality, let's say, for 20 to 30 years or longer, your ability to predict accurately is not so great, and mine's no better than anybody else's, I think. But you can definitely see that there's a risk. Right, and you can begin to sort of try to measure that risk. I've seen people come out with predictions like there's a 50% chance in 7 years we'll have a large-scale quantum computer. I think whatever percentage of a risk of that probability you're going to put to it, it's likely going to be higher than the risk we would accept for any other classical attack against our cryptographic system, providing long-term confidentiality. And because it's a risk, whether it comes to fruition or not in reality, we can build to avoid that risk. And I look at post-quantum cryptography as, hey, there's a risk 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I know I'll have things that I want secret longer than that. That risk I want to try to avoid. So I do think it's really around looking around those corners, trying to remove those future risks to the security guarantees that we're trying to deliver today.
And how easy is it to develop standards and have these kind of conversations when it is kind of 15, 20 years down the line?
Well, certainly when it comes to cryptography, standardization is an essential element, not just for interoperability, but that's certainly a big part of it. But there are many reasons to have standards for interoperability. It makes trade easy, gives us an ability to have a variety of products that all meet our needs. So standardization is essential to that, but it's also essential to developing sort of assurances that you have the cryptography right. And through the standardization process, especially this NIST process, you're seeing it's really dominated right now by analysis. People are kind of specifying like how to do all the interoperability, but that's really secondary to having a clear description of the cryptographic system and how it relates to an underlying hard problem that we believe takes a significant amount of computational power, both classical and quantum, to sort of have an assessment of, how much effort does it take with the best known attack to break this? And that's one way that we measure sort of the assurance of a cryptographic scheme. But the other mechanism we use is how long will it be before I see a new best known attack appear? And I think of that more as like exponential backoff, right? So when I originally defined the algorithm, here's my estimation of the best known attack. Some research, publication, and analysis goes in, and a new best known attack comes out maybe in a year or two. We tweak the parameters, we modify the algorithm a little bit. Another best known attack comes out maybe in 5 years, 6 years. We tweak it again with new parameters. And now we can say, okay, well, we've put in about 1 million person hours looking at this algorithm over the period of 10 years, and we haven't seen a new attack in 8 or 9 years. We can begin to sort of say, well, I think it's a reasonable assumption that the next best known attack is also going to be 20 to 30 years out. And now I have an algorithm that I have high assurance in, that I know the best known attack, I know the computational risks of that best known attack, and I have a belief about when the next best known attack is going to come. And that's always the viewpoint, like I think a cryptographer is going to take on an algorithm. It's never forever. It's always when is that next best known attack coming, and how long do I have? And most algorithms break kind of like in slow motion. You get to see like a crack in, like, if you look at how the hash functions break, they sort of go after, a reduced round version, and then they keep extending that attack. And that gives you 5, 10 years to develop a new hash algorithm to replace the existing ones.
So when we're talking about algorithms to make them quantum secure or quantum safe, that's not necessarily forever. It's just one that can give you time to develop the next.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I personally worry about is the computer scientists that are coming out of universities today. I mean, they can give you 4 or 5 different classical search algorithms, write them up on a whiteboard for you, but almost none of them are taking classes in how to write a quantum algorithm. And so it's safe to say we're in our infancy in development of quantum algorithms. as a community of scientists and computer scientists and research scientists. So I expect to see, what we think is quantum safe to change over time with the development of new quantum algorithms.
Okay, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, saying that quantum algorithms require different computing requirements, different bandwidth. Could you just expand a bit on kind of the challenges that post-quantum algorithms bring that perhaps classical don't see?
Well, I mean, so the classical systems that we're using today are based on essentially two hard math problems. One is known as the integer factorization problem. RSA, if you take two primes, you multiply them together, that forms the RSA modulus. And if you can factor that, and that modulus is part of the public key, so it's assumed known to everyone. So if you can factor that, you essentially break the cryptographic system. And then with elliptic curve, there's something called the discrete log problem, which is essentially solving in classical or finite field arithmetic. It's if I give you a base point or base value g and a large prime p, and I raise it to the x mod that prime and send that as my public key, then it's hard to find that private exponent that I didn't tell you about, and that's the discrete log problem. And both those problems miraculously kind of get broken by Shor's algorithm. So the new post-quantum schemes are built on another set of mathematically hard problem, like finding the shortest vector in a lattice, finding, adding errors to coding problems and trying to discover what those were. And so they're fundamentally new mathematical problems that are believed to be hard, that are being used. And there are no known quantum or classical algorithms to solve those problems.
Yet.
Hopefully, in the best case scenario, you have a proof that they don't exist, but those are harder to come by.
Okay, and the algorithms that NIST kind of are choosing, they announced this year, what is it about them kind of that has put them out as kind of to the forefront?
Well, I think one of the selection criteria is, besides having good mathematical model for believing that the problem is hard, they also have to be efficient and work today. And I think NIST has selected algorithms that are efficient on the classical computing environments that we use today. So, for instance, Kyber is as fast as elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, which is typically faster than RSA at equivalent security levels. So having them be efficient today on our classical systems, we know is going to be an engineering constraint that if we can avoid, we should try to avoid it. They are larger in bandwidth size, so I think beyond the security evidence of the hardness of the problem, you're looking at computational and bandwidth performance as part of that selection criteria. And Kyber and dilithium kind of provided the best sort of set of those parameters, and I think that's why they were selected as the algorithm.
I'm curious, as you mentioned, the limitation of bandwidth and just the computational powers. So these algorithms, would they be how would they be retrofitted to current devices and systems that we have?
Yeah, and that's where, like, prototyping today, taking a look at our inventory of how we've done our engineering with our classical systems, and some of that inventorying is easy. We have our standards, and they define sort of how we're packing public keys into packets that are being transmitted. So we can begin doing that work in parallel today, just to see if it works, right? Do we have to extend the length of the length field to accommodate a larger public key size, things like that. So I think a lot of that work is going on, and you can see that sort of, especially in the IETF, where they have a PQ TLS specification. TLS is transport layer security that we use to secure all our web transactions, and there's another one for post-quantum SSH, secure shell protocol, that's used typically to configure systems. I know it's widely used by our customers at AWS to configure their hosts, as well as, of course, web services, which is our core business in AWS. So we can do that development now to see how they fit and begin writing out performance. That's what we've done. We've deployed post-quantum TLS today on our commercial services of our key management service, our secrets manager service, and our certificate management service. So even on our what we consider our most secure services, we're already deploying PQ hybrid to allow our customers to understand the impact and to let them know that we're going to make this migration as quickly as we can and as smoothly for them as possible.
Do you find that your customers are very kind of aware of the risk, or like it's a big concern for them?
There's definitely different. I mean, the set of customers is pretty broad. So the customers that I typically work with are aware of the problem. They want to know that we're aware of the problem, that we're working on it. So the companies that are all in on AWS really look to us to say, to tell them that, when they need to start planning, and to forecast to them that we're going to provide them the tools as soon as prudently possible, essentially.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm afraid we're kind of coming to the end of our time, but I just wanted to finish with perhaps your thoughts on kind of the future of this. I know you said it's still in its infancy, but kind of where you hope it to go next, and ETSI's work as well.
Well, I was anxious for the NIST selection. I think they had the industry on pins and needles waiting for that news. Now that they have, I'm anxious for the next step. Really, there's still this additional cycle of focus on these two algorithms. Essentially, there's as I mentioned, there's two others, Sphinx Plus and Falcon, that are also being considered for digital signatures. But really, to have the industry, hyper focus on these these proposed schemes for standardization, so that in 2024, 2025. We come out the other side with high assurance algorithms that the whole industry accepts as secure, and we can begin sort of migrating as a community, because you can't really do it alone, right? There are too many standards, there are too many systems to be upgraded for one entity really to do all of it, and so fostering that collaboration, keeping everybody on the same page with the same goals through events like ETSI's Quantum Safe Cryptography Workshop is essential to really figure out what are the next pieces that we need to build to ensure a smooth migration. So I think that's what we're going to be working on at ETSI. It's what we work on in the ETSI Quantum Safe Crypto Technical Committee to produce those necessary artifacts.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us and talking through the event and kind of the topics around it. I will put the link to the event in the description so everyone can go find out more about it if they are interested. Again, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.